about inclusive appearance policies today. So I'm going to try and avoid talking too much because we've got a really brilliant panel. So what we'll do first, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Abi. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Education and Youth. So if I perhaps first ask my panel to introduce yourself, so your name, why you're here, so kind of your role, and just really briefly why you think that appearance policies are important, or your own personal experience with it. So basically just why you're here today. If I maybe start with you, we go around.
So, hello everyone. So I'm Jackman. I'm a partner of the international firm Mitchell, and I've been qualified as a solicitor for more years than I like to admit. But one of my main areas has been education law. Originally started as school exclusion, and then 11 years ago I had the privilege to act for an 11-year-old pupil. He's anonymised as G, and it's known as the school exclusion cornrows case, because he was literally excluded within the first 30 minutes of arriving at secondary school, his first big day at school, because of wearing his hair in cornrows. So I acted for June, his family. It's a case that meant a lot to me, it still does, and means a lot to the family, who I still have the privilege of being in touch with. And I just think it really opened up issues and put the spotlight on the need for, not all, but many schools to think in a flexible, inclusive way about school uniform appearance policies and the really negative impact it can have on young people if they're basically told to deny their culture and their identity. So it's a case that means a lot to me, especially as the issue of natural hair, especially African Caribbean people, continues to be a quite critical issue emotionally. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Yami. I'm going to the town grammar school. I've been going there for 6 years now, and I feel like being included in the school community is very important, because you go there 5 times a week, and it's important that you feel like your voices and your culture is being represented. Because as like a person who's from an ethnic minority, I think sometimes like our culture isn't as represented as maybe other people's culture, and it's important that the student body does feel included and do feel comfortable going to school every day. Or 5 times a week.
My name is Marina, and I've also been going to town since year 7. And the reason why I'm here is because I think it is important for black students especially to not have to fear going to school because of their hairstyle, and not have to fear being discriminated against, and not knowing if there's anything you can do about it.
Hi, I'm Desmond Bean. I'm the CEO and Executive Head Teacher of the Vanessa Joshua for Education, which includes Tammy Grammar School within that, which is a girls' central school. We, a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, we introduced a complete change and overhaul to our hair policy by removing any rules around hair whatsoever. The school community has a significant Black African population within it, and roughly around a third of the population Black African. And we recognised the discrimination that was taking place in the school by having hair as one of the policy that was written out. We have since then continued to campaign against hair discrimination in the school, especially with that. We've been very pleased with actually some progress, but our view has been there's still a significant way to go. As we look at the cornrows case, some very entrenched issues around hair and prejudices around that. Hence, we're here to advocate for future changes, and also to help navigate other schools and school leaders around this to ensure that they get it right and do make changes around that.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa. So I work with Abi at the Centre for Education and Youth. I nearly forgot my own organisation's name. Kind of echoing some of the points that have already been made. I think it's important to have inclusive hair policies to make young people feel like they belong in the school. There's a lot of research that kind of highlights the importance of belonging and kind of the positive impact it has on young people. And I think sometimes people may see hair or appearance policies as being something that's superficial, but I think people very much hold a lot of their self-esteem and kind of their culture, their history, etc., and the way that they may dress or the way that they may do their hair. I actually faced hair discrimination while I was working once. I was about 19 at the time, and I remember finding it extremely humiliating and quite demoralising. And I started to look into some of the cases that are going around in schools, and I just felt like, you know, it's really important that this isn't the feeling that young people in our schools are having. Hence why I started to kind of look into this work, and I think that this panel is really important, particularly highlighting the voices of young people and, you know, really get an idea of what impact policies may have and how we can start to think about making them more inclusive and ensuring that young people don't feel embarrassed or humiliated about something that's fundamentally part of their culture or maybe their religion as well. We also actually have a video from Kate up here, who some of you may remember from the Ruby Williams case. So her young daughter was discriminated at school for having an afro. We're just going to show a short video from her that she's recorded so she can be here with us in spirit. Let's hope sound works this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation today. Apologies, I can't be with you there in person. My name is Kate Williams, and I'm here as a parent, but also as a teacher and researcher. It's brilliant that you've chosen how we can think about how to embed inclusive uniform policies in our schools, especially regarding hair policies and pupils with afro hair. This is my family a few years ago. So I have two mixed-race children who are now young adults, who have grown up in Hackney. There were lots of things that concerned me about parenting in Hackney, like issues to do with police or racial profiling, or the dangers of being rude for a cat again. Being mixed race in Hackney is pretty usual, and my children never felt they were part of a minority group. I didn't expect my children to experience racism in our community, and I certainly didn't expect it by school staff. It was important to us that they grew up with a positive self-image, and in the knowledge of their place in world history. Their dad was a Macedonian whose family came here from Ghana, but they've always understood that their heritage is rooted in Africa. They went to school in Hackney, and in primary school my son had a mobile, like his favourite football at the time, and my daughter made her class. For ease, it was part of our weekly routine. She loved having her hair loose at the weekends though. She went through a complicated journey with her hair towards the end of primary school and the beginning of secondary school, which involved causing some heat damage through straighteners. As her white mother during those years, I felt it was important for me to step back and enable her to become the expert of her specific hair texture and her desires about her own hair. When she started secondary school, she kept her hair mainly straight, but rapidly realised the damage that had happened. She began researching ways she could wear her hair that was healthy for her hair, but also ways in which she liked it. My plaiting skills didn't meet her standards as a teenager, but we occasionally went to the hair shop and she would get extensions as an expensive treat. I do not remember ever reading a hair policy at any school that my children went to, or that I taught her. When we chose her secondary school, we specifically chose one that described itself as not being a boot camp, as we didn't want our daughter facing unnecessary rules. Years 7, 8 and 9 went by uneventfully, and we'd be tended to wear her hair out in natural, or in a high pony or with extensions. Then in 2016, in year 10, the sledgehammer hit. This was her. This was the end of year 9. So if you haven't heard her story already, I suggest maybe you Google it and read the full hers, as I still struggle to express it without crying. It was such a shock that there was a hair policy at all, and that Ruby was suddenly being challenged about her natural hair. We instantly knew that we had to question it, as the hair policy stated that Afro-style hair, including buns, needed to be a reasonable size and length. We knew that it couldn't be right to have a policy that singled out a single type of hair, especially one that's connected to a specific racial group, like Afro hair. I began researching what rules there were for schools in this regard, and then began a long journey for me. Ruby is trying to move on with her life now, and she will still be involved in awareness raising and campaigning, but she's also a university student and she's only 20. We had so many people who tried to help Ruby between 2016 and 2020 when the school finally changed their policy. We met Angela Jackman, who is with you today, and the case she led on was encouraging for us in our fight. All of these cases are creating evidence for schools, legal folk, and young people and their families too. When Ruby went public in February 2020, Desmond Dehan, who is with you today, phoned in and spoke to her on the radio. Listening to how his thinking has developed, and other school leaders like him, has encouraged me to embark on some educational research into how school leaders feel about her hair and why these rules keep popping up. I'm at the IOE today as part of my doctorate course, which is why I can't be with you in person. As a teacher, parent and citizen, I cannot rest until no stone is left unturned when it comes to ensuring that this stops happening to our precious children. I'm passionate about collaborating widely in order to eliminate the possibility of hair policy existing in the school, which directly or indirectly discriminates against the people with Afro hair. Our only option as a family, in the end, was to take legal action against the school, using the Equality Act 2010. We did this with the support of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission and many other people. We had folders of evidence and we had a strong case, but the process was still horrendous, unpredictable, soul-destroying, and ultimately led to both my daughter and myself having breakdowns. We're both on our paths to recovery now, and in our own different ways. And we as a family are so proud of Ruby and how she's coped with this unfair situation that was forced on her when she was only 14 years old. It cannot be that families are forced to take legal action against schools. I would like to see hair policies are part of statutory education, and that I will continue to lobby politicians about this. That way, the DfE would actually have the power to intervene. Schools seem to have too much freedom right now to write any policies that they wish about hair. They do have a public sector equality duty regarding the Equality Act 2010, but who is actually holding them accountable when this isn't upheld? The answer appears to be nobody. Events like this that you're attending today will help prevent other young people facing what Ruby and many other people have faced. The more schools can think about why hair policies can be damaging to young people, the more awareness will be spread. Young people face so many challenges already in their lives. They do not need us to add to their load by targeting them due to a racial characteristic. They're at school to learn, not to have their bodies policed in this way. Thank you for listening to me and to all the panelists as well. I hope you have a great session. Everyone has my contact details here today, so if anyone has specific questions for me, feel free to get in touch. I still volunteer now with World Afro Day, who helped us back in 2020, and I would encourage you all to look up the Big Hair Assembly and sign up to it. It's all free, so that we can celebrate World Afro Day on September 15th. You could also consider adopting the Halo Code at your school, where all the hard work has been done for you from a brilliant group of young people who have written a brilliant policy themselves. We have a family support group for any families whose children are going through this in school, so feel free to signpost any families my way as well. Have a great session, and apologies again that this wasn't in person.
So I'm going to go fairly straight into a kind of conversation with the panel members that are here. So Angela, what was particularly important about the work that you did with Kate's family and made you think that was something you wanted to get involved with?
I didn't work directly with Kate. I met her, but I can talk about Jean and the corporate case. And I thought that, when we had the decision announced in the High Court, I had no idea that there was going to be so much press interest. It was literally, my mom called me and said, why are you on ITV News at 1 o'clock? It just spread like wildfire throughout the country. And I don't know if that's because popular opinion finds it interesting to talk about school disputes or anything to do with difference. I think also the facts were very striking when people that were 11-year-old who were literally arriving at the school on the first day of secondary school was still being automated. So at the time I thought it was fairly soon after the Equality Act 2010 was implemented as well. And I think it put a real focus on equality, diversity and inclusion in the context of schools. And that's not to say that that wasn't already on the agenda. It wasn't, it certainly should be. But I think it was perhaps a bit of a pivotal point in recognising that the High Court cannons came on school uniform appearance policies. It did make a very specific finding that the way in which that policy was applied resulted in indirect racial discrimination, which was quite a strong finding, I think. And I think it just brought a real focus on the need to think about the inclusion of the schools to be flexible as well in terms of their school level policies. I think the other thing about this case was it's a very, very, very good school, excellent profile, and the judge was very concerned about misrepresentation in the press because in between a couple of hearings, certain tabloids were reporting that Jews legal team were accusing the school of being racist, very inflammatory language. And so the judge actually called the legal press in to court before we had a judgment to say, I'm concerned about some of the misreporting that's happening. It's a very good school. What we're looking at is specifics of their policy. So it was quite important not to, you could quite easily have gone down the road of being very emotional and, hyperbolic, racism in education, and that would have distracted from the key issue, which was the way that some schools very unfairly design and implement school policies. And the thing with G is he went to a new school, which was in the same borough, and welcomed him with open arms, very happy at the time there, which to show that there's absolutely no reason for the school in question to have that forward policy. So I think it probably kick-started further discussions around diversity and inclusion within schools in the context specifically of appearance and ethnicity of students.
You spoke a little bit about flexibility.
Yes.
What should schools bear in mind thinking about legal structures that exist to protect students? What should schools be thinking about when they design policy?
Kate has made a call for statutory guidance that schools would have to apply. But even with statutory guidance, you can say, well, we thought about it, but we've got reason why we're not applying it, so it doesn't force schools to follow the guidance. In terms of legal structures and so on, I think it's very important for schools to at least make sure they consider the non-statutory guidance, which is quite detailed. It makes it very clear which pieces of legislation schools should be absolutely taking into account to make sure that they comply with. Top of the list of the Equality Act 2010, the list of protected characteristics so that uniform appearance policies do not discriminate on any of the grounds, gender, race, ethnicity, etc. And it also refers to the Human Rights Act because it certainly pretends that a policy that results in a student being excluded or having to feel that they can't safely attend that school could breach the Human Rights Act in a couple of ways, including Article 8, right to private life, and also Protocol 1, Article 2, right not to deny education. They're not necessarily easy arguments, but there are ways in which those kind of claims can be brought. And my view is, why waste your time and precious resources at school on having to fight legal proceedings, and if you lose, paying loads of money for costs, when what we need is for those precious resources to be focused on education of the next generation of leaders and so on. So I think schools really need to think very carefully about the legal requirements on them. And to also, following Lloyd George 2 years ago, everybody should be thinking about diversity and inclusion. Everybody should be doing their absolute best to fight and eliminate as far as they can the impact of racism. And that's happened across lots of different sectors. So I hope that the same is going to happen in schools as well, in terms of just being very aligned to diversity, inclusion, racism, doing your best to undo decades of racism that's resulted in disadvantage to so many people. I would hope that, on top of the legal duties, that the political climate that resulted from the murder of George Floyd is also tempering down, so that schools should want to show that as part of society there are lots of steps that have to be taken to make sure that students are properly included and can excel rather than held up.
Vanessa, could you talk to us a little bit about the research on why inclusive appearance policies are important in the long term?
Yeah, I'll start just briefly talking about the research that's done on schools. It's worth saying the research is kind of sparse at the moment, and it predominantly does focus on hair, but there was quite a few striking findings. So Doug, for example, conducted research in 2020. So it was with 500 adults and also 500 preteens, and they found that half of black school children had been sent home due to wearing their hair either in a natural style or a protective style. They also found, so when they was looking at, when Pantene was looking at microaggressions and kind of the impact it has on young people, particularly around their hair, they found that school was one of the top places where young people do face microaggressions. So that was selected by 59% of the participants. So what we see is young people and adults as well. There is research that looks at the impact it has on adults, but we're seeing that young people are going to school, being sent home for their hair, and also facing microaggressions as well. And what this has is unfortunately quite a detrimental effect on them. So the research by Pantene found that 52% agreed that the discrimination they faced based on their hair had a negative impact on their mental health and also their confidence. So I do think these small instances, I say small instances, but these instances of discrimination in school also have kind of a trickle-down effect. So as we see, it's impacting young people's confidence in the long term. And I do also think we need to think carefully about what the long-term legacy is of these kind of ideas. So me, for example, being discriminated at work, I don't think that this is something that happens in isolation. As we're growing up and as we're in our formative years, the ideas that are around us kind of inform what we do later. And I think if we have policies in schools where we're making young people, particularly around their hair, feel as though what is natural to them and what is part of their culture isn't okay, it does have kind of a long-term impact on the way that we see black hair, the way that we see natural hairstyles as well. So I'll say to summarize it, I think there's two main reasons why, I'm going off the question slightly, but I'm just going to go ahead. I think there's two reasons kind of in the long term why this is important. I think on the one hand, all of us sitting here, I'd imagine think that education is key to kind of a better future, improving diversity and making the world just a better place. So I think, it's imperative that schools are inclusive. They do kind of, pave the way for the way in which that we want young black people to be treated, particularly around their hair. And I think as well, number two, as all of you know, we are building the future generation in our schools, and I think it's about ensuring that they don't continue to hold these discriminatory ideas, and they also don't grow up thinking that their natural hair, there's something wrong with it. As I said before, when it happened to me, I found it humiliating, it was demoralizing. Kate spoke about how disheartening it was, and I was kind of an adult at the time. It's about making sure that we're not having a detrimental impact on our young people, to ensure kind of these discriminatory ideas don't continue to pervade our society, whether that be in school or in work.
Desmond, what for you was the catalyst to thinking about changing appearance policies across your schools?
First, it's worth pointing out this is pre-George Floyd, so an awful lot of attention was around diversity in EDI as a result of that, quite rightly. and that wasn't the origin of this. There were probably a couple of catalysts. One was just observation. And I've related it to the students previously that I witnessed in the school, students being stopped for certain points by members of staff. And it was conversations. It wasn't necessarily always sanctions, but the conversation itself would be a sanction. And it was clearly around hair. And one particular occasion, there was a sixth form assembly, school assembly taking place, and as the students coming in, campus hair, grades, etc. We stopped by a member of staff, and it was like you could see the press forward face at that particular point. And kind of connected what was happening in this issue, and then we looked at what our hair policy actually said. What was interesting from that was there wasn't that much specific in the hair policy. This was individual judgments being made about what was right and what wasn't, because they did this hair policy about what was a natural colour, for instance. And it made us rethink actually if we needed to be there at all. And if it was there, was it clear about how you used that and applied that? But at the same time, and partly as a result of that, I also read Emma Lavery's book, Don't Touch My Hair. From a point of view, there are means to understand this. Tell and the amount of effort and time that we put into girls' hair. Tell that therefore there's a contrast between that and how they were treated for it, and then how that was ended up under somehow a behaviour umbrella. And therefore a better understanding of it would actually close the gap like clearly I would have about understanding black and African hair. So putting the two combinations together, we made a fairly swift decision that we changed it now. Every day students can change their hair was a day to go, so it was a damage. And it went against the grain, which would normally be to do with the consultation, see everybody's views, etc. We felt it's better to change it first and then work on the reasoning and understanding why. Unfortunately, we pretty soon went into a pandemic not long after that, so the opportunities to embed and understand that were lost for us in the time that we made the change. And it's at that point, because we did that, and we were had a future article in some of the Times around it, that we connected with data and Ruby and realised just how far some of these things could go. My experience as a head certainly as a CEO, so teachers have a tendency to double down when they get something wrong. Because one thing as a head teacher you're not expected to do is get something wrong or apologise for it. And Ruby's case was a classic example of doubling down. You were wrong in the first place, you shouldn't have that policy there, rather than step back and say, okay, lesson learned, we'll go this good idea and fight it. Because of the perception that if you let this go, it's an open door to whatever perception was going to happen as a result of that. And what we've realised from doing this is, yes, it opens the door to an awful lot, but not negatives. It opens the door to an awful lot of critical examination about what kind of rules you have in schools, why you have them, and why you police them. I'm sure we'll get on to sort of later to talk about some of those aspects of that too. But I think that's fairly important because for us this was a local, this was our context and what we saw, not national, get aligned fairly quickly with national movement. And I suppose partly I'm listening to Angela's case and his case. Part of disappointment is how far we haven't gone in that period of time. That this is still a debate, it's still the right to be in schools. And one of the reasons we publicise this is to try and encourage parents and school leaders to rethink that actually it doesn't happen. It's interesting, I think, just for a slight aside, that you mentioned about this being a good school, as well as the mention that. It is frequently good schools where things like hair are usually placed because of a misunderstanding of somehow that represents a standard, a vague standard that someone can how it's seen in the community or means and is it gang related, whichever has the school perceived. It was a far bigger issue I think than what was perceived as good schools and Winston, grammar schools, etc. Than it is elsewhere, because those relatively minor things like behaviour policies take over-emphasis and the negative effect. Whereas in schools where there's far more diverse intake, far more comprehensive, there are other bigger issues to tackle in the head and it takes that lesson. And I think that's part of the risk. It's quite worrying in some respects that the perception of the court is about the reputation of the school and not about the young person involved in that horizon. Probably challenge to some extent that that actually does fit under racism. And we were sort of very clear that actually if we were doing this, we felt our intention was, we had to accept the fact that it probably originated from a racist perspective, or at least like a white supremacist perspective about what was right and what was not within that. And I think that's very hard for schools, particularly successful schools to do, is to mirror up and to actually maybe we're not the good guys in this and maybe we haven't got this right. It's changing.
For you guys as teachers, so I think I'm right in thinking that you were at school before the policies changed. So if you think back to those days, how do you think those appearance policies shaped your experience in school?
I think specifically with the hair policy, I remember like in year 7, there was a time when I did grades, like before I knew the hair policy was a thing, and I think like being told that your hair isn't appropriate for school is really embarrassing, and it's also it's an expensive mistake for teachers to make, like in a way, and I think it restricted my freedom in that I stopped doing braids, I started doing cornrows, I started relaxing my hair. My hair was very damaged, and if I wore it like out in an afro, it was uncomfortable because people weren't educated. They'd touch my hair, they'd ask ignorant questions, and I think reflecting back on it, the new hair policy has allowed for the education to start happening, and I don't think it's fully there yet, but I think it's the step in the right direction.
Well, personally, I haven't experienced, discrimination against hair because I have normal hair. Obviously, that's a long protection. But I think it's really important that people who are not black people and not discriminated against because of the hair policy know about the culture and why the hair policy is discriminating against people. For example, I didn't really know about this big issue until Marina in a podcast was speaking about it, and it really opened my eyes, and I didn't realize it was a big thing until she told me. I think it's important that other people in the school are aware that about the hair policy, and I do think that after the new hair policy has been reinforced, a lot of students have been given good feedback on it, and it has opened up new doors for other cultures as well. For example, now our school is thinking about what policy is discriminating against other culture, which, for example, nose piercing. Currently, our school doesn't allow nose piercing from 8 to 11, is 7 to 11, but it is a topic of consideration. It's a topic that they're considering for the next academic year.
It's the start of the conversation.
Yeah, so it's opened up something for this as well. Because I know a friend, this was a couple of years back, she had a nose piercing and she was in the corridor and a teacher stopped her, but even though she had a permission slip from her parents, she still had to take her nose piercing off. And now in sixth form where you are allowed nose piercing, her nose hole closed up, and she doesn't have a nose piercing now, and she's so traumatized by what happened before, she doesn't want to get one anymore. So I think things like that, having strict policy on things that discriminate against culture is quite, in my opinion, quite useless. I don't think it shouldn't be there. The rules shouldn't be there. So yeah.
I remember one time a teacher confiscated my nose ring, and I thought, why would you want to touch that? My next question is back to Vanessa. And I feel like it's really been talked about a little bit, so if anyone else wants to jump on this up, please do. But what do you think the kind of lasting legacies are of appearance policies, and specifically hair policies, on our idea of what's kind of seen as normal or professional?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it. I think I mean, Desmond touched on it as well. It's quite an archaic idea that certain things are professional, certain things aren't. It's steeped in white supremacy, Eurocentrism, and I think fundamentally we live in a multicultural society, and I think a lot of us are really trying to think about diversity and ensuring that spaces are inclusive. And I think, you know, this is a small way that we can start to make a step forward. As the people spoke about, it can be humiliating, embarrassing, and you know, this is a formative time in young people's lives. I think there's no need to add barriers if there's no need for it. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of like repeating a lot of the things I've already said, so I might pass maybe on to the girls that we've got on the panel. What do you think is kind of the lasting impact of, or the lasting importance of making sure that policies are inclusive?
I think, especially with the hair policy, it allows for more freedom, and it also allows schools to recognise where racial bias and discrimination happens. And it also holds teachers accountable, because I think in schools there's an air of like the teacher's always right, and you can't challenge that or the rules. And with like changing the hair policy, it allows for more education from the teachers, because just because they're teaching you doesn't mean that there's stuff that they don't need to learn. And especially if they don't come from the same background that you do, it's important that they are aware of the cultural significance of certain hairstyles.
What was the question again?
So about the kind of lasting impact on policies and how it might affect what people see as being normal or being professional.
Well, I think the like changing, speaking of the hair policy, changing the hair policy so it's like not discriminating against other culture. I think that's very important, because now that people like come into school feeling, I mean, not too happy, but they don't feel like they're not included anymore. As in, like before, when just like going to school, as I mentioned, 5 times a week, like daily, and you know, adhering to the strict rules just to not get in trouble. I think people didn't really like coming to school, and I can see the difference that the hair policy has made on so many people. And like there's like some students in our school who comes into school every week with new hairstyles, and I think it just like increases the positivity in the school as well, and it makes people feel included in the community as well.
We're really near to the end, but I have one more question, just again for you two, if that's okay. So like, quite often when people talk about uniform policies or appearance policies, they might talk about how it prepares students for the future and for the world of work. How do you think that a more inclusive uniform policy, or in your school's case, no hair policy, how does that prepare you for kind of being adults in the workplace?
With the hair policy, I think it allows for the hard questions to be heard with teachers as well as students. So I think for Black people especially, it opens a conversation of why cultural assimilation is so prevalent in society and how you can kind of break that cycle. And it starts at school, and I think having that kind of no hair policy where it's like the natural hair colour for Black people is not the same as white people isn't a thing anymore, allows for like the exploration of styles where it still will fit into a certain category in your working place. So I think see society as well, like when you're going to job interviews, and as a Black person you're more likely to wear a wig that's straight than your natural hair and afro because it's seen as more professional. I think changing that narrative from a younger age will positively influence that when you get to that age.
And then we'll be into the
I think like as I mentioned, like educating people who aren't like Black people, for example, aren't being discriminated against, and letting them know that that you shouldn't discriminate against something that's so like that doesn't appear. Discriminating against hair policy sounds so ridiculous. Like it's so normal. It's hair. It's how it's meant to be. And for me, I never knew it existed because it doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't sound. We're in like modern modern world, so it doesn't sound right to me. And it's quite weird that some schools are discriminating against these kind of black people and stuff. But you know, like allowing people to choose how they look like and allowing like them to choose how their hair should look like and all that stuff is very important because it gives them a sense of independence as well and a sense of freedom and belonging, which they will need in the working world as well. But also educating other people who are not black people. They are going to be soon in the future, they might be employers, employees, so they should be aware that they shouldn't discriminate against black people as well.
Thank you so much. Before we do finish, I wonder if I'll start with Vanessa and we'll work our way this way. But one kind of what you'd like people here to leave with, so either a tip of something that you found useful to think about, or one reason why inclusive appearance policies are really important.
I got policy. I mean, I would say the most important thing is kind of if you are implementing school policies, particularly around uniform, have a real think about what impact it's going to have on different groups. I mean, we've spoken a lot about hair here, but there are other ways in which uniform policies impact young people. For example, there's cases of young Sikh boys, for example, going into school and having their turbans removed. Young girls being told that their skirt is too short, which I mean sounds like a ridiculous statement in and of itself. How can someone's skirt be too? Sorry, no, it was too long. Apologies. They were saying the skirt was too long. The young person had a skirt up to their knee. So yeah, I think it's about really thinking about what the impact is, and to be honest, like going outside and really trying to find information. Like our young people mentioned, these aren't things that they necessarily thought about, but hearing their peers go through it, you know, they start to get a better understanding. And I think just going out of your way to find out a little bit more about black hair in this case and why it's important, maybe finding out why some young people maybe want to wear longer skirts or why people wrap their hair, really trying to find out what or where these things come from and ensure that the policies that you're implementing aren't discriminatory.
I've probably got two key things. One, I think in terms of context of schools, that frequently, traditionally what we do is we teach, train teachers in two things: pedagogy, how to teach. So they understand that, and they understand their subject. Sort of training how to do their subject. We very rarely, other than in the context of SEND, very rarely teach train teachers in their students, with those who are in front of them, and understanding that. The girls mentioned about there are things to learn as teachers. And if you are you're a white teacher and you have students who represent black or other ethnic minority students, you need to know an awful lot about those students and their culture if you're going to effectively educate them. And if you're a white male head of a girls' school, you also need to be really conscious about issues around girls and feminism and rights. And you have to, that's part of your duty as much as it is to know your geography, your teaching, or how to teach approach insurance principles, whatever it might be. And I think that's that pillar of teacher training is mostly absent. Which means that frequently you're going to have school leaders who are going to do what they do because they think it's right what was done before, without any critical reflection on that. And I think that's then the second part, is that critical reflection. That if you had a behaviour policy or a uniform policy as part of that, the first bit is asking the question, why do I have that? Why is that in there? What does that relate to? Is uniform behaviour? Why do I have a uniform policy? What's the purpose of it? And who's been involved in determining that? Is it the senior leadership team, head teacher on their own that have decided that? Or is it involved the wider community in that? Actually consult, actually come to those conclusions around that? There's a common misconception and belief, again I think it's around some of the successful schools, that how your students look when they leave the school gates in some way is a reflection of the standards of your school. They have to look in a particular way, without any critical examination of that way it actually is, and who's looking at it, who's making that judgment. And I think linked to that is where we've come in this cycle, is the using a moment to categorize your body, your business. That if you're a student in school, we don't police your body. It would be wrong for us to be policing girls' bodies, hence skirt lengths, etc. But all aspects where it goes very quickly over the line of in some uniform to actually give them a moral or family judgment about you as a person based on what you wear. But in particular around your body, your hair, jewellery, we've mentioned, this is yours and your family's business, it's not ours. Our part is the uniform that you wear, how we've chosen it, what it is and how you wear it to an extent are the bits which are our part of responsibility. And too often the schools overstep that line into policing people's bodies. There's no successful outcome to do that.
I'd say to schools that still adopt like discriminatory care policies, I'd say to look at the effect that it has on students. So like, especially black students, because you're telling them that they can't have hair that's not black, and they don't wear protective styles, they wear the hair afros, and that's too distracting, so then what do they do with their hair? And I think it's also important to have a safe space where there's an open discussion between teachers and students, where teachers can also become accountable. Otherwise, no change will happen, and the change that will happen won't be significant enough to, So I think asking why, and also not just leaving it there, seeing the effects that it actually has on students in the real world and outside of school as well, and also educating people that they won't affect. So, like Bianca was saying, she didn't know there was a hair policy. Thinking about what can be done to make sure that people know the policies in their school, because ultimately, if they're going to school, they need to know the policies that they're supposed to adhere to, and I think educating people on the effect that it may have on their peers, so they can also be allies, is very important, and I think it's overlooked.
I think it's important that, coming from a school perspective, I think it's important that schools listen to the student body and see the students, how they feel about this uniform policy. Like for me, I was very passionate about this whole having most music, and now it's a topic of discussion. So I think it's important that the schools are aware of how the students are feeling about sensitive policies. And I think, as Mina said, it's important that people try to educate themselves about their peers. So first of all, they don't offend anyone, and second of all, so they can help them with removing those discriminating rules.
I endorse everything you said. For me, I feel, without my lawyer's hat on, it's really important for schools to engage with their communities, and that's come up in some of the case law before, the baby case, in terms of the making sure that they're looking outwards versus just being really forced hearing from young people, but really up to date with what's happening. And I guess from a lawyer's point of view, my concern is, because I feel very strongly about diversity and inclusion, that we should all be considered within the context of diversity and inclusion and embedding and instilling in staff and students that this is the way the world always should be and we should all be striving towards it. And I think all schools recognise you don't necessarily know school. I mean, I think you mentioned that some teachers can find it difficult to accept that they've made errors. We all make errors as humans. So it's recognising that that is the case, we all make errors, and to look for external advice, whether that's a professional report or whatever, but don't feel that it's you against the world, because we have too much at stake in terms of the next generation.
Thank you so much. And thank you all our panel. This has been really interesting for me and hopefully for everyone else. To everyone in the room, we're going to have some goodie bags kindly provided by Irwin Mitchell, but I need to locate my cup first. So please do pop back in 10-15 minutes after you've had a bit of lunch. We've got goodie bags. But thank you so much, panel. This has been fantastic.